Welcome my channel. Today we're uncovering a powerful true story that history tried to bury. Buried by history, Kofi Redhawk, the Black Seminole warrior America tried to erase. This is not a legend or a movie script. It's a real struggle for freedom, identity, and survival. Pieced together from scattered military records, oral histories, and erased voices. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And make sure you subscribe, because uncovering real, hidden history like this takes serious time, research, and commitment to the truth that textbooks often ignore. Kofi Redhawk's story begins long before the battles and legends that would later define him. Born in the early 1800s, Kofi's exact birthplace is disputed, but most historians agree he was born into a world of immense struggle, either in West Africa or in the early slave settlements of Florida, where escaped Africans and Native Americans formed small, resilient communities. From a young age, he witnessed the harsh realities of slavery, oppression, and survival under constant threat. These early experiences shaped his understanding of freedom as something that could never be negotiated or compromised, only fiercely protected. As a child, Kofi was trained in the survival skills that were essential in Florida's challenging terrain. The swamps, rivers, and forests that many saw as dangerous became his classroom. He learned to track, hunt, and navigate by the stars. These were not merely practical skills, they were tools of resistance. Every step through the dense brush, every lesson in finding edible roots or avoiding patrols, was a preparation for a life that demanded both cunning and courage. He observed the elders and warriors of his community, absorbing lessons in stealth, combat, and diplomacy. The Black Seminole communities were a blend of escaped African slaves and Seminole Native Americans, and this fusion created a culture rooted in mutual respect, strategy, and survival. Kofi's adolescence was marked by the tension between his youth and the brutal realities surrounding him. He saw family members captured or killed, raids conducted by U.S. forces, and villages burned. Each tragedy reinforced the necessity of leadership and tactical thinking. By the time he reached adulthood, Kofi had become more than a survivor. He had grown into a young leader, respected for both his knowledge of the land and his ability to inspire others. His presence commanded attention, not just because of physical skill, but because he carried the wisdom of those who had come before him and the courage of someone who had nothing left to lose. Education in Kofi's community was informal but profound. Elders taught him history, the history that official records would later attempt to erase. Stories of African kingdoms, of the resilience of enslaved people, and of alliances forged between escaped slaves and the Seminoles. These stories were not simply tales, they were lessons in identity, resistance, and hope. Kofi understood that survival was not just about hiding or fighting. It was about preserving culture, memory, and a sense of self in the face of forces determined to erase him. By the time he was a young man, Kofi Redhawk had become a figure deeply entwined with the Black Seminole identity. He was known not only for his physical prowess, but also for his strategic mind. Local communities relied on him for protection, for leadership in organizing raids, and for maintaining the fragile networks that allowed escaped slaves to survive in hostile territory. His formative years in the swamps of Florida and the communities of the Black Seminoles were what shaped him into a warrior capable of standing against one of the most powerful forces of the era. Every skill Kofi learned, from stealth and combat to leadership and diplomacy, had roots in his upbringing. His story reminds us that history is often shaped not only by battles and treaties, but by the lessons learned in the quiet, dangerous, and formative years of a young leader. Kofi Redhawk's early life was a crucible, one that forged not just a survivor, but a symbol of resistance, courage, and the enduring fight for freedom that would leave an indelible mark on the history of the Black Seminoles and the United States. Kofi Redhawk's emergence as a warrior and strategist was not a sudden transformation, but the result of years spent navigating the treacherous landscape of Florida and the constant threat of capture or death. By the time the Seminole Wars intensified in the 1830s, Kofi had already gained a reputation among both Black Seminoles and allied Native American warriors as someone capable of extraordinary bravery and intelligence. His understanding of the swampy terrain, rivers, forests, and hidden paths that confounded U.S. forces became one of his greatest assets. Unlike many leaders recorded in official histories, Kofi combined traditional Seminole guerrilla tactics with lessons drawn from African military heritage, creating strategies that leveraged speed, stealth, and unpredictability. In the early stages of the conflict, Kofi often led small, mobile groups into enemy territory, striking supply lines or patrols, and then disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. These missions were more than raids. They were carefully orchestrated operations designed to destabilize U.S. troops while minimizing casualties among his own people. He understood the psychological component of warfare as much as the physical. The sudden attack, the appearance of the Black Seminoles in impossible locations, and the rumor of a nearly supernatural warrior haunting the swamps all contributed to the legend that would follow him. Kofi's leadership style was inclusive and strategic. He recognized that unity between escaped African slaves and Seminole warriors was essential for survival. Where others might have viewed their differences as obstacles, he saw opportunity. He trained warriors from both communities, teaching them the ways of ambush, tracking, and reconnaissance while emphasizing the importance of communication and coordination. He encouraged younger fighters to respect both African and Seminole traditions, understanding that cultural cohesion strengthened morale and resilience. This made his units highly effective and difficult for U.S. forces to predict or confront. He was also known for his intelligence in diplomacy and negotiation. Kofi did not rely solely on force. He recognized the value of alliances, gathering intelligence from sympathetic settlers, and occasionally parleying with rival groups to buy time or secure safe passage. These diplomatic maneuvers were risky, but Kofi had an uncanny ability to read people, understand their motivations, and exploit weaknesses without compromising the safety of his people. His reputation as a negotiator added to the mystique of his leadership, as stories of his cunning spread through both Seminole and U.S. forces alike. One of the most notable aspects of Kofi's strategy was his understanding of mobility. He refused to anchor his forces to fixed locations, knowing that the terrain itself was both his shield and his weapon. Encampments were temporary and constantly moved. Scouts maintained constant vigilance, and decoys were often used to mislead enemies. This approach not only kept U.S. troops off balance, but allowed the Black Seminoles to survive in a landscape where conventional armies could not. Kofi's ability to predict enemy movements and prepare ambushes was so effective that he became the subject of fear and respect in reports written by soldiers, many of whom were baffled by the uncanny efficiency of these small, mobile units. Even in battle, Kofi emphasized minimizing unnecessary bloodshed. He recognized that every loss weakened his people and risked the collapse of their fragile society. His strategies focused on disruption and deterrence, striking at resources and morale rather than engaging in frontal assaults. This approach distinguished him from other military leaders of the time, as he combined tactical intelligence with a deep understanding of human cost and the long-term survival of his community. Kofi Redhawk's role as a warrior and strategist was inseparable from his identity as a Black Seminole. Every action he took in the field reinforced the idea that the Black Seminoles were a force to be reckoned with, a community capable of defending itself, adapting to its environment, and resisting the overwhelming power of the U.S. military. His careful planning, knowledge of the land, and ability to inspire loyalty created a legacy of leadership that went far beyond simple acts of bravery. It established a model of resistance that would be remembered, even as official histories tried to erase him. By the end of the 1836 campaigns, Kofi had become more than a fighter. He was a symbol. To his people, he represented the possibility of freedom, intelligence, and survival in the face of impossible odds. To the U.S. military, he was an enigma, a figure who defied their expectations and challenged their assumptions about power and warfare in Florida. His strategic genius and courage set the foundation for the Black Seminoles, continued resistance, and ensured that, even when history tried to erase their contributions, the story of their struggle and his leadership would survive. Kofi Redhawk was not just a warrior. He was a tactician, a teacher, and a protector of a people whose freedom depended on both courage and intellect. His legacy as a strategist demonstrates that true leadership in times of oppression requires more than force. It demands vision, adaptability, and a deep understanding of the human spirit. Kofi Redhawk's role in uniting escaped slaves with Seminole fighters was one of the most critical aspects of his leadership and a defining feature of the Black Seminole resistance. At a time when both groups were constantly under threat from U.S. military campaigns and slave catchers, survival depended on solidarity, coordination, and shared purpose. Kofi understood that neither escaped Africans nor Seminole warriors could withstand the might of American forces alone. Their strength lay in combining knowledge, skills, and determination, in creating a coalition capable of defending its members and maintaining a foothold in the harsh Florida terrain. The Black Seminoles were a unique community, formed from escaped African slaves who had fled the plantations of the South and found refuge among the Seminole people. They shared knowledge, culture, and, most importantly, survival strategies. However, despite their shared interests, tensions sometimes arose due to differing backgrounds, languages, and customs. Kofi Redhawk emerged as a bridge between these communities. He respected Seminole traditions, participating in ceremonies and learning their techniques of guerrilla warfare, while also preserving and teaching African customs and strategies. His ability to honor both identities created a sense of unity that became the backbone of resistance in the region. Kofi's leadership extended beyond training fighters. He became the planner and coordinator of combined operations that often struck deep into enemy territory. He organized small units composed of both Black Seminoles and Seminole warriors, carefully selecting members whose strengths complemented one another. These groups could move quickly, attack supply lines, and disappear into the swamps before reinforcements could arrive. Kofi's strategic thinking ensured that the coalition operated not as disparate factions but as a single, cohesive force, agile, intelligent, and nearly invisible in a landscape that most outsiders could not navigate. One of Kofi's most remarkable contributions was his ability to communicate and maintain trust within the coalition. He held regular councils where elders and younger warriors could voice concerns, discuss tactics, and plan for the future. These meetings were crucial in fostering a sense of shared ownership over their struggle. Kofi emphasized that success required more than fighting skill. It required understanding, respect, and a commitment to protecting every member of the community. His insistence on equality and mutual respect helped prevent internal divisions from undermining their efforts. Kofi also recognized the importance of intelligence and information sharing within the coalition. He developed networks of scouts and informants who could track enemy movements, report on U.S. military plans, and warn of slave catchers in advance. This intelligence allowed the Black Seminoles and Seminole allies to avoid direct confrontation when disadvantageous, while striking precisely when the enemy was vulnerable. Coordination was essential. Any misstep could result in devastating losses. Kofi's meticulous attention to detail and foresight ensured that the coalition operated efficiently and with minimal risk. Despite the overwhelming power of their opponents, the alliance led by Kofi was not only military but also social and cultural. He promoted shared ceremonies, rituals, and storytelling that reinforced unity and morale. Music, dance, and oral history became tools to strengthen bonds and remind everyone of their shared struggle for freedom. Kofi understood that culture was as much a weapon as the rifle or the spear. It was what kept hope alive when the odds seemed insurmountable, and it was what sustained the community through repeated attacks and betrayals. Kofi Redhawk's ability to unite these groups had tangible effects on the ground. His coalition disrupted supply chains, ambushed patrols, and forced U.S. forces to expend disproportionate resources in Florida swamps. Small units, often no larger than a dozen fighters, could tie down entire regiments, leveraging their knowledge of the terrain and coordinated tactics. The fear inspired by these raids gave the coalition a psychological advantage that amplified their physical strength. U.S. military reports, later studied by historians, repeatedly described the Black Seminoles as elusive and fearless, highlighting the effectiveness of Kofi's unified strategy. Beyond the battlefield, Kofi's alliance ensured the survival and relative autonomy of Black Seminole communities. By maintaining unity with Seminole warriors, the escaped Africans had protection, access to food and resources, and safe pathways to move deeper into Florida's wilderness when needed. Kofi's vision was not short-term. He understood that building and maintaining this coalition was essential for the long-term survival of their people. The success of the alliance extended beyond military victories, ensuring that the Black Seminoles could preserve their culture, traditions, and families under constant threat. Ultimately, Kofi Redhawk's ability to unite escaped slaves and Seminole fighters was a masterclass in leadership under extreme adversity. He created cohesion where fear, scarcity, and oppression could have easily sown division. He combined intelligence, diplomacy, cultural respect, and strategic brilliance to form a coalition that defied one of the most powerful forces of the era. This alliance was not merely about fighting. It was about survival, identity, and the preservation of freedom. It is this remarkable achievement that makes Kofi Redhawk not just a legendary warrior, but a transformative leader whose influence reverberates long after history attempted to erase his name. Kofi Redhawk's story is not only about his heroism on the battlefield, but also about the deliberate efforts by American authorities to erase him and the Black Seminoles from history. From the moment the Seminole Wars intensified in the 1830s, U.S. military and governmental forces viewed the Black Seminoles not just as opponents in war, but as symbols of resistance that challenged the very foundation of slavery and the social order. Kofi's existence, leadership, and the very survival of his people were inconvenient truths for a society invested in the myth of total control over enslaved populations. Erasing him from records became as strategic as any battle plan, and the methods employed were subtle, systemic, and enduring. Official military reports often minimized the presence of Black Seminoles, referring to them vaguely as runaways or hostile Indians, deliberately omitting any recognition of organized leadership or strategic skill. Kofi Redhawk's name, despite his undeniable role in organizing raids, defending communities, and uniting escaped slaves with Seminole warriors, was largely absent from official records. Where he was mentioned, details were obscured or misattributed, framing the resistance as chaotic rather than deliberate. This tactic served a dual purpose. It undermined the legitimacy of Black Seminole leaders and reduced the threat they posed in public perception, allowing the government and press to frame the wars as manageable skirmishes rather than a sustained and organized struggle for freedom. Beyond military records, newspapers and historians of the era participated in erasure, whether consciously or unconsciously. Accounts that might have celebrated Kofi's leadership were ignored or reframed to highlight the savagery of Native Americans while glossing over the African descended participants. By emphasizing racial stereotypes and portraying the Black Seminoles as secondary actors, these narratives stripped Kofi and his peers of their agency. Stories of strategic brilliance, disciplined resistance, and organized communities were lost in favor of portrayals that reinforced white supremacy and justified aggressive campaigns to suppress these groups. Even oral histories, which could have preserved Kofi's legacy, were threatened. Plantation owners, military officers, and local authorities often actively discouraged or punished the telling of stories that celebrated escaped slaves or highlighted organized resistance. Many African-descended families who had survived the campaigns were forced to flee, resettle, or remain silent for fear of retribution. As a result, the cultural memory of Kofi Redhawk and other Black Seminole leaders was fragmented. Stories persisted in small, isolated communities, passed quietly from parent to child. But these accounts were never formally recorded or acknowledged in broader historical narratives until much later. The systematic erasure extended to maps, legal documents, and treaties as well. Land that had been controlled or protected by Black Seminoles was often claimed by the government or settlers, and references to organized Black Seminole resistance were omitted from treaties and legal agreements. Kofi's leadership, which had ensured the survival of communities and the protection of territories, was therefore erased from the official record. The result was a historical vacuum in which he existed in practice and memory, but not in the archives that later generations would rely upon to reconstruct history. This erasure was not merely an accident of oversight. It reflected a broader social and political strategy. Acknowledging Kofi Redhawk and the Black Seminoles as capable leaders would have challenged narratives of white dominance, the supposed inevitability of slavery, and the perception that escaped slaves could not organize or defend themselves effectively. By removing his name and achievements from historical records, America attempted to rewrite the story of the Seminole Wars to fit a more convenient narrative, one in which enslaved Africans were passive, submissive, and easily controlled. Despite these efforts, traces of Kofi's impact survived. Military dispatches sometimes hinted at an elusive, clever leader organizing the resistance. Oral histories preserved his name and deeds in whispered stories that survived through generations. These fragments eventually allowed historians to piece together the broader story of Kofi Redhawk and the Black Seminoles, revealing the extent of their strategic brilliance, courage, and leadership. In many ways, the very effort to erase him underscores the power of his influence. The United States recognized the threat he posed not just militarily but ideologically. The erasure also had long-term consequences for the recognition of African, American, and Native American contributions to U.S. history. For decades, the Seminole Wars were framed primarily as conflicts involving Native Americans, with little acknowledgement of the Black Seminoles' role. Kofi Redhawk, whose tactical genius and leadership were central to the survival of these communities, remained invisible to most historical accounts, a casualty of selective memory. Only in recent years, through careful examination of scattered documents, oral histories, and anthropological research, has his story begun to emerge in full. Kofi Redhawk's erasure reminds us that history is often written by those in power, and what is remembered or forgotten is influenced by social and political agendas. His leadership, courage, and the survival of the Black Seminoles were too threatening to the established order to be acknowledged at the time. Yet the persistence of his story, the careful reconstruction of his life and deeds by historians, and the oral traditions that survived show that erasure can never fully succeed. Kofi's legacy endures, not only as a warrior and strategist, but also as a symbol of resilience against the forces that sought to remove him from history. In truth, the attempt to erase Kofi Redhawk highlights the very significance of his actions. If he were inconsequential, no effort would have been necessary to suppress his memory. The fact that authorities and later historians tried so hard to minimize his existence proves that he was a figure of immense influence, whose leadership shaped the lives of countless people, and whose story continues to challenge the historical record today. Kofi Redhawk's life is a testament to the power of resistance, the danger of erasure, and the enduring truth that courage cannot be buried, no matter how deep history tries to hide it. Kofi Redhawk's legacy is not confined to the battles he fought or the strategic brilliance he displayed during the Seminole Wars. It extends far beyond his lifetime, resonating as a symbol of courage, resilience, and the fight for freedom. While history attempted to erase him, the very persistence of his story underscores the significance of his contributions, not only to the survival of the Black Seminoles, but to the broader understanding of resistance against oppression in America. Kofi's life represents the intersection of African, Native American, and colonial histories, revealing a complex tapestry of alliances, cultural survival, and defiance against overwhelming odds. Even though official records minimized or ignored his role, Kofi's leadership directly shaped the survival and organization of Black Seminole communities. Through his guidance, escaped slaves were not just surviving in isolation, they were forming a structured, autonomous society capable of defending itself, negotiating alliances, and asserting its presence in a hostile landscape. This was a radical act in a world dominated by slavery and racial hierarchy, where any form of self-determination for African descended people was perceived as a threat to the social order. By creating a unified and disciplined community, Kofi ensured that generations of Black Seminoles could maintain their cultural identity, resist enslavement, and navigate a path toward freedom that few in similar circumstances could achieve. Kofi's legacy also lies in the strategic and tactical lessons he left behind. His ability to blend African military traditions with Seminole guerrilla warfare demonstrated an adaptive intelligence that challenged contemporary military powers. He taught that terrain, mobility, intelligence gathering, and psychological operations could outweigh sheer numbers or firepower. These methods were crucial not only for the survival of his people, but also for undermining U.S. military campaigns that relied on conventional tactics ill-suited to the Florida swamps. Modern historians studying asymmetrical warfare and insurgency often cite the Black Seminoles as an example of how knowledge of the environment and coalition building can create extraordinary outcomes. A legacy rooted directly in Kofi's leadership. Culturally, Kofi Redhawk represents the persistence of memory and identity in the face of attempted erasure. While official histories sought to remove his name, the oral traditions preserved by Black Seminole descendants ensured that his deeds were remembered. Songs, stories, and communal practices carried forward his example of resilience and leadership. These oral histories kept alive a sense of pride, survival, and shared identity among communities that were otherwise marginalized and hunted. Kofi's story demonstrates that legacy is not solely written in books or official documents. It lives in the hearts, minds, and culture of those who remember and honor it. Kofi's legacy is also symbolic in a broader social and historical context. He challenges the narratives that have long dominated American history, narratives that often reduce enslaved Africans and their descendants to passive victims, rather than recognizing their active resistance, intelligence, and strategic capability. By studying Kofi Redhawk and the Black Seminoles, historians and communities can gain a deeper understanding of the complexity of resistance, the agency of oppressed peoples, and the ways in which marginalized groups have shaped the history of the United States. In this sense, Kofi's legacy is not just regional or military. It is profoundly educational and transformative, reshaping how we think about freedom, resistance, and survival. Even today, Kofi Redhawk serves as an inspiration for descendants of the Black Seminoles and for anyone confronting oppression. His story is a reminder that courage, intelligence, and unity can create extraordinary results even against overwhelming odds. He exemplifies the principle that leadership is not merely about authority or command, but about vision, strategy, and the protection of a community. The survival of his people, despite relentless pressure from the U.S. military, demonstrates the effectiveness of these qualities and solidifies his place as a historical figure whose life carries enduring lessons. Kofi Redhawk's legacy also highlights the ongoing struggle for recognition and justice. The fact that history attempted to erase him underscores the importance of reclaiming marginalized narratives, of uncovering the contributions of those who were written out of textbooks, and of acknowledging the full scope of resistance to oppression. Scholars, historians, and communities continue to research, document, and honor Kofi's achievements, ensuring that future generations understand both his tactical genius and his role in preserving a culture under threat. This ongoing reclamation is part of his living legacy, proof that the past can be recovered, celebrated, and learned from, even when attempts have been made to bury it. Ultimately, Kofi Redhawk's story is a testament to human resilience and the enduring power of memory. His strategic brilliance, leadership, and dedication to his people created a legacy that defied erasure and continues to inspire. The battles he fought were not only physical but symbolic, representing the fight for identity, autonomy, and justice. By remembering Kofi, we honor not just one man, but the countless lives and communities whose survival depended on courage, intelligence, and unwavering determination in the face of impossible odds. His legacy reminds us that even when history tries to forget, truth has a way of surviving, and the courage to resist can echo for centuries.